A 3.5-foot iron bar was fired straight through this man's skull. It went in under his cheek and came out the top of his head. And then he sat up, asked for a pen, and calmly described what had just happened to him. The year was 1848. This is not a myth. This is one of the most documented medical cases in all of history. His name was Phineas Gage, and what happened inside his head would accidentally give birth to modern brain science. But to understand why this one accident mattered so much, you first have to meet the man before the bar. Because the most important part of this story is not the injury. It is who Phineas Gage was and who he became. Phineas Gage was a railroad construction foreman, and by every account, an exceptional one. He was 25 years old, strong, smart, and well-liked. His employers called him the most efficient and capable man they had. His job was to clear the way for the railroad by blasting through solid rock. It was precise, dangerous work, and Gage was trusted with it because he was careful, methodical, and reliable. Remember those words: careful, methodical, reliable. They matter later. The method was simple but unforgiving. You drill a hole in the rock. You pour in blasting powder. You add a fuse, then sand, and then you pack it all down tightly with a long iron rod called a tamping iron. Gage had a custom one made, smooth and tapered like a giant javelin. On September 13th, 1848, near Cavendish, Vermont, something went wrong. For a single, ordinary moment, Gage was distracted. He turned his head to speak to his men, and as he did, his iron rod scraped against the rock and struck a single spark. The powder ignited. The explosion fired the iron rod out of the hole like a cannon shot, straight up with enormous force. And Phineas Gage's head was directly in its path. The bar entered point first under his left cheekbone. It passed behind his left eye, tore up through the front of his brain, and exited clean through the top of his skull. It flew so high into the air that it landed dozens of feet away, smeared with what it had taken with it. By every law of medicine in 1848, Phineas Gage should have been dead before he hit the ground. A massive iron bar had just destroyed a huge portion of the front of his brain. And here is the first impossible thing. He did not die. He did not even lose consciousness. According to the witnesses, within minutes, Gage was talking. He sat up. He spoke to the horrified men around him. And he walked, with a little help, over to an ox cart. He rode nearly a mile back into town, sitting upright the entire way. When he arrived, he climbed out of the cart himself and sat on the porch of a hotel to wait for the doctor, making polite conversation with the gathering crowd. When the local doctor, John Martin Harlow, finally arrived, Gage greeted him with a line that has echoed through medical history. He looked up at the doctor and said, "Here is business enough for you." Dr. Harlow was a young, dedicated physician, and he did something genuinely heroic. He did not give up. In an age before antibiotics, before sterile surgery, before anyone understood infection, he cleaned the wound and committed himself to keeping this impossible patient alive. It was a brutal fight. Gage developed a severe infection. At one point, he fell into a coma so deep that his family, expecting the worst, had a coffin prepared for him. But Harlow refused to quit. And slowly, astonishingly, Gage pulled through. Within 10 weeks, Phineas Gage was up and walking. He had survived an iron bar through the brain. He had survived the infection. He had survived 1848 medicine, which was arguably the more dangerous of the two. By any measure, it was a miracle. But here is where the story turns, and where it becomes one of the most important cases in the history of science. Phineas Gage had survived. His body was healed. He could walk, talk, and remember. But the people who knew him said something deeply unsettling. He was not the same man. The bar had destroyed a specific region at the front of his brain. We now call it the frontal lobe, the part that governs planning, judgment, patience, and self-control. The careful, methodical, reliable foreman was gone. In his place was someone impulsive and erratic. Dr. Harlow recorded the changes. Gage had become fitful and irreverent. He swore constantly, which he had never done before. He made grand plans and abandoned them moments later. His friends, struggling to describe it, settled on a single haunting phrase. He was, they said, no longer Gage. Now, to us, this seems obvious. Of course, damaging the brain changes the mind. But in 1848, this was a revolutionary, even shocking idea. Many people still believed the mind, the soul, the personality was something separate from the physical meat of the body. Phineas Gage was living, walking proof that this was wrong. Here was a man whose body was intact, whose memory worked, who could speak and reason, yet whose entire character had been altered by damage to one specific lump of tissue. His personality lived in his brain, and a piece of it had been blown out. This single accident became one of the founding cases of neuroscience. It was among the first powerful pieces of evidence for something we now take completely for granted: that different parts of the brain do different jobs. That who you are is, at least in part, physical. But while scientists saw a breakthrough, the wider world saw a spectacle. Phineas Gage, the man with the hole in his head, became a curiosity. And for a time, he leaned into it. He went on display. He appeared for a while at Barnum's American Museum in New York, the most famous house of human curiosities in the country. There, Phineas Gage sat as a living exhibit, holding the very iron bar that had passed through his head, telling his story to paying crowds. And it is from this circus chapter that the legend of Phineas Gage was born. The story that got passed down through textbooks for over a century. The story of a good, decent man transformed by his injury into a violent, drunken, raving monster. A complete moral wreck. And here is the twist that almost no one knows. That legend is, to a large degree, a myth. The dramatic monster version of Phineas Gage was exaggerated, embellished, and in some tellings simply invented long after the fact. The real evidence we have, the careful notes from Dr. Harlow, who actually treated him, tells a very different and far more hopeful story. Yes, Gage changed dramatically right after the accident, but the personality changes appear to have been at their worst in the years immediately following. And then, over time, Phineas Gage got better. His brain, in a way that still amazes scientists today, appears to have slowly adapted. He learned to compensate. He rebuilt routines. He clawed back a functioning life from the wreckage. And here is the detail that destroys the monster myth completely. For several years, Phineas Gage worked as a long-distance stagecoach driver in Chile. Think about what that job actually requires. You have to manage a team of horses. You have to keep precise schedules. You have to handle money, passengers, and unpredictable danger on rough mountain roads, day after day, in a foreign country. This is not the job of a raving, incapable monster. This is the job of a careful, methodical, reliable man. The damaged frontal lobe had not erased Phineas Gage. It had knocked him down hard. But the man and the remarkable brain he had left had spent years quietly climbing back up. The monster of the textbooks had, in real life, gone back to work. Eventually, Gage returned from Chile and moved to California to live near his mother and sister. He worked on a farm. He lived a quiet, ordinary life. He had built something almost normal out of one of the most abnormal injuries in human history. But the injury never fully let him go. In 1860, almost 12 years after the iron bar tore through his head, Phineas Gage began to suffer severe epileptic seizures. The old wound, it seemed, had finally caught up with him. He died at the age of just 36. But the story of Phineas Gage did not end in that grave. Years after his death, Dr. Harlow, the man who had refused to give up on him, tracked down the family. He asked for one thing: Gage's skull and the iron bar. Harlow gave both to Harvard Medical School so that science could keep learning from them. And they are still there today. You can go and see them. The skull of Phineas Gage, with its impossible holes, sitting beside the very iron bar that made them. So what is the real lesson of Phineas Gage? It is not the cartoon version, the good man turned into a monster. The truth is quieter and far more important. It is a story about two kinds of resilience: the resilience of the human body that could survive an iron bar through the brain, and the resilience of the human mind that could be shattered, scattered, and slowly, stubbornly rebuild itself into something that could once again drive a coach over a mountain. Phineas Gage was not a monster. He was a man who was dealt the single most catastrophic blow a person can receive, and who spent the rest of his short life quietly putting himself back together. That is not a horror story. That is one of the most human stories there is. An iron bar went through his head and helped invent the science of the brain. And the man it passed through turned out to be far stronger and far more ordinary than the legend ever allowed. More than a century and a half later, his skull and that bar still sit together, quietly telling the truth. If you made it this far, do me a favor and subscribe, because there is a new, strange, and true piece of history here every single week. And tell me in the comments, what is the most impossible survival story you have ever heard? I will see you in the next one.